Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're dialing in. I would love to know where actually. So if you want to introduce yourself in the chat box, my name is Frank. Hello, I will be your host, guide, and generalist moderator for the purposes of today. The topic du jour is generative AI. And yes, we've jumped on the bandwagon just like everybody else, but anything that moves this quickly and has this much money pulled into it and really is on the tips of the tongue of everybody and on the agenda for many boards, it certainly deserves us to have a good old crack at it. So without further ado, allow me to introduce my incredible panelists. My goodness, I have really lucked out on this particular panel. I have Arjun, the Director of Data Science at Wesco, former go-to-market leader for AWS in the energy vertical, running HPC and machine learning. So, hello from Texas, or are you in Florida, Arjun? It must be very early for you. I am sorry, mate.
No worries. I'm in Florida and good to see you all. Thanks for the intro.
We have the incredible Susan Walsh, the owner and founder of the Data Classification Guru and lip sync extraordinaire, if any of you are familiar with her absolute diva of a profile on LinkedIn. Hello, Susan.
Hello, how are you?
I am well, or at least I will be well if I could get this LinkedIn live streaming work. This handsome chap, John Cooke, the CTO of Dataception, all-round loud-mouthed but qualified as such, expert in LLMs and SLLMs, to complement my TLAs. John, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, appreciate this. I'm so looking forward to this panel, this discussion. It's an amazing group, and yeah, it's looking to get stuck in. So thank you for inviting me.
Cool, isn't it? No holds barred. And of course, last but not least, my dear friend Aled Sage, VP of Engineering at Cloudsoft, and the most engineer I've ever met. Welcome, Aled.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Nice to see you broadcasting from your shed.
I was just going to say before you change the photos, I'm the before on the left and then John's the after on the right, so don't pull your hair out.
That's not awkward at all, Susan. So look, you've had a chance to get to know us a little bit. We're going to have some fun this hour. This is not going to be a stale corporate presentations because I'd rather, how did Bill Bailey put it? I'd rather saw my arm off with a stale baguette than do something corporate and boring. So you got to know us. We'd like to get to know you. Where are you dialing in from? Points for the most obscure location. What do you want to get out of today? Give us a sense of what level you're at. Are you at the beginning of your journey? Are you intermediate? Do you have some key challenges that you'd particularly like to get out of today? There will be an option for Q&A. Are you evaluating stuff? Do you want to go back to foundations on cloud? And then preferences. We have an absolute banger of a live lab going out in 2 weeks. So this is a much more practitioner-led focus. We have speakers from AWS, and we'll be looking into Bedrock, Party Rock. We may allude to some services like SageMaker and touch on machine learning foundations. Or if you're a little bit more on the leadership and business side of things, come along to the exec roundtable. It's going to be a lot more focused on strategy, problem solving, how to approach from an organizational design perspective. Of course, if you want some expertise, I would like to give a shout out to our wonderful sponsors for today, Cloudsoft, absolute bulletproof AWS engineers, 40 of them up in Edinburgh, of which I'm the CMO. So naturally, I would be remiss if I did not give them a shout out. If you want a one-to-one workshop, that's fine. Select that. We'll reach out for you. Engineer to engineer, no sales spam. Don't worry about that. If you don't want anything, you can decide later. So let's have a look. I'm going to share the results here. Can you all see that? Yeah. That is quite interesting. So we've got a good split, about 60% beginners, or certainly very humble people, 37% intermediate, and 3% experts. Or those could be the 3 chatbots that managed to sneak in, passing themselves off as real people. And then, okay, so I guess kind of where we're pitching at this level, not pitching, educating, I suppose, is what is generative AI? How can we give you some practical frameworks to understand how to evaluate it? And then I guess the more use case specific stuff in the middle, that'll be very useful. And then, yeah, thank you to everyone who's specified a preference for the live lab, the roundtable, or so let's jump straight in, shall I? Part one is very much about how we've arrived here, right? If you think about, generative AI may be relatively new on the scene, and we'll get into the nuts and bolts of that, but it actually goes back a long, long time, much, much further back to the 80s, much further back than the 80s, excuse me. So kind of track this through, right? Start off in the 80s, we're starting to get some theory of mind, some conceptual stuff, the emergence of the Chinese room experiment. Into the 90s, we're kind of getting into some really, really clever mainframes that can beat very smart Russian chess players. Things are beginning to emerge now in the noughties. We're kind of getting into algorithms, big data. This is really the era of where, making sense of all of this data is sort of coming to fruition. It's the decade that brought us the likes of Facebook, Google, all of the tech titans pivoting to data. 2010s, this is when it enters the mainstream. We're starting to see AI enter the agenda and enter the mainstream. It's no longer a fringe academic. It's no longer a thought experiment. It's starting to get commercial. And now look at the pace. ChatGPT exploded onto the scene 18 months ago. 100 million downloads in under 3 months. Fastest number of downloads in consumer history. That really put things on the map for consumers. And now, as we kind of extrapolate forward, what did the 2030s look like? What does that mean for us as organizational leaders, as technologists, as practitioners? How do we go from the sort of embedded view where there's machine learning in my Netflix, there's machine learning in my cereal, there's machine learning up everything now, to a point where decisions are completely automated, completely autonomous, and completely independent? That's kind of my extrapolation. But my opinion doesn't really matter. My job is to warm you guys up and to bring you expertise from the panelists. So part one, making sense of generative AI. John, let me throw this one to you. Would give us a good definition of generative AI and what it is and really what it isn't in the bigger picture of AI.
Yeah, so great question. So the way I think about generative AI is like a creative assistant that can generate really cool content, images, video, text, based on a bunch of data that it's learned fundamentally. So I give it a topic, I give it an instruction, it has this massive database itself, like a database of information. It then generates some content based on my instructions to be able to do it.
Susan, I think we all had a little bit of a laugh during rehearsal where I claimed
what he said, yeah.
where I claimed generative AI was a magical talking hat and you should trust everything that comes out of it.
Yeah, no, I say it's smoke and mirrors, because underneath all of it is either a clean or dirty data set that, drives everything. And I think there's a lot of myth out there that, like many things before it, that, it will fix everything and anything just by the press of a button. And it doesn't work like that, unfortunately.
Unless you've set the commercially reasonable standard to create a spam cannon use case. Arjun, you are deeply into this. You've been doing AI since before it was cool. Definitionally and sort of structurally, what's under the hood?
Yeah.
We've had some advancements in the transformer architecture, but that itself is very compute intensive. Kind of take us through the last 5 or 6 years. How have we arrived at generative AI as we understand it today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, as John and Susan mentioned, it is, like, just peel that onion into those two words, generative and AI. It is an AI model. It's a deep learning model. And deep learning has been in practical existence for over a decade, at least right now. And then the generative part comes from the fact that it has learned a lot from the data. It has learned the patterns from the data that it can be used to generate new content using whatever it has seen. So from a technical perspective, there was the suite of deep learning models called generative adversarial networks, or GANs. These were practically used, like I said, over the last decade. Nobody knew about it until ChatGPT came out as a product and everybody started to talk about AI. But GANs have always been in existence. And that is that fundamental architectural component behind the scenes, which is kind of like an adversarial model where two models are going to be pitting against each other, like opposing each other to generate that new data instance. Now, it doesn't have that context or the memory. That's where transformers come in. And when you embed transformers with GANs, voila, you get, like that is what is under the hood when you think about ChatGPT or any Gen AI model. So I don't want to get too deep into that, but just think of this as an architecture that has been evolved from deep learning, and you have this attention mechanism propelled by this transformer model, which kind of gives you that context and the memory for that deep learning architecture.
So that was a deeply comprehensive definition, what one generating, one discriminating, and as a way of getting better, taking this back a little bit to methods, supervised learning, reinforcement learning, unsupervised learning. These are all things that have been around for a long time. But we're going to play a little game with the audience now. Ooh, games. In the chat box now, we're going to call out a 3-letter acronym, or if you're lucky, a 4-letter acronym, and the first person to guess what it is wins points. So, fingers on buttons, please. LLM. What does that stand for?
Easy.
Large language model.
All right. GPT.
I don't actually know that one.
There we go. Yep. Alistair got it.
Great parrots talking.
Yep.
Alistair Hodge. I'm quick, but I'm not accurate. A generative pertain. All right.
Pre-trained rather than pertain.
GAN. Oh, I think we've stumped them there.
Well, Arjun said it, so.
Arjun said it.
Yeah.
GAN, a generative adversarial network. All right.
There we go. Hades got it.
An SLLM. Slim Shady.
Sexy large language model.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's good. James H. Bravo. Small.
My version was better.
Although you could argue you didn't need the large in there, right?
All right.
Yeah.
All right. FM.
That means something else in my world.
Good. All right. So we are awake. Thank you very much. And we are relatively entertained. Alad, very importantly, I want to come to you. So we've had a bit of a definition. We've had an explanation of how it works. You're on the front line with everybody from high growth startups to tier 1 banks, right? Based on your observations and your customers with your conversations with other technology leaders, what do you think the key challenges are for businesses when it comes to generative AI right now?
It's figuring out the use cases. There's a big push particularly from boards and others as to that fear of missing out almost. How do we actually take advantage of this new technology? But yeah, it is that technology looking to solve a problem rather than a business case looking for an answer. And yeah, there's huge potential as to what it can be used for, but it's then turning that into things that are really going to either give a concrete return on investment to justify it or open up new product lines or whatever. So most of the people that we deal with are talking about it rather than actually finding concrete things to do with it. They're looking at POCs, they're looking at the possibility of it. But yeah, like getting that from a POC or even just from an idea to a POC and into production is where people are challenged.
I
John,
think there's also a piece where like Susan said, people think that Gen AI is it's a magic box. There's the beginning and the end. There's a real piece around actually understanding how they work and kind of how they fit into the wider ecosystem. So we talk about use cases which combine classic AI, classic data engineering, and also generative AI. And I think that's finding where that line is actually a really important bit that people do struggle with.
Susan?
And then, of course, I have to say data quality, because if it's pulling information and trying to answer questions about your business and the information is wrong, then, you know, you're making decisions based on bad data.
Arjun?
Yeah, I would agree with all the points that was said here, and I would add accuracy. We have a false sense of what comes out of ChatGPTs of the world, especially large language models. It gives you a high degree of fluency. That doesn't mean that it has high degree of accuracy. So all the terms that you have heard out there called hallucination, that is real. Enterprise-wide applications, right? Air Canada or be it the city of New York, they all had hiccups in putting ChatGPT out there. And this hallucination, which is that false sense of accuracy, because it has a high degree of fluency and people mistake that for accuracy. So that problem is not yet solved. And enterprises are working, how can you get that high degree of accuracy, especially if you put it out for a customer-centric application. You need to have accuracy. You cannot compromise that. So that, to me, is like one of the biggest challenge.
So these are all super valid points. I think they're, just to round off here, definitions wise, generative AI refers to deep learning models that can generate high quality text, images, and other content based on the data they were trained on. We've put that definition into the chatbot. Secondly, generative AI is one of several sub-disciplines within AI. If you're looking for a mental framework, think about action words. Generate is one of several action words. Predict, classify, analyze, extract. Think about that. And the third and the final point here is know your tool. Know your use case, know your tool. Is generative AI really the best way to solve a problem when really it's good old-fashioned machine learning or a bit of advanced statistics, or maybe nothing at all? Maybe it's a people problem. Finally, let's think about how generative AI is embedded into the user experience. How does it actually solve a problem? What is the interface? Is it an application powered by generative AI? Is it a tool that is already being internally consumed? And then, of course, let us not forget the role of trusting the data. If you want to drop acid with your favorite chatbot on a Friday night, that's right, Matteo has rightfully mentioned hallucination. So look, we're at we've got 60 seconds to go. Can I get a 20-second summary from each of you? What is the key takeaway from this? How would you make sense of generative AI in one piece of advice? Aled.
So I think about your use cases, think about where you're actually going to get efficiencies, where have you got data that you want to actually take advantage of, and like talk to some people in your industry and experts about how you could actually do that. It's nice to go and play around with these technologies, but talk to somebody who's tried this before rather than starting from scratch yourself.
Susan?
Start with the end in mind and figure out how you're going to get there with clean data, please.
Clean data. John?
It's worth understanding how these actually work, not from a kind of a pure tech, but like just understanding these are sophisticated pattern match engines, kind of probabilistic in nature. So understanding that and understanding where they play in the use cases and the other part, and the fact that you're also, to Arjun's great point, it's about an increase in accuracy. It's not binary. It's not like a software solution which is like works or it doesn't. It's an accuracy thing. So understanding those and really where that fits in would be my advice.
Arjun, round us off.
Yeah, I would say if you're an enterprise, especially think about the scale. And to Susan's point, where do you want to get there? A lot of people do these cool POCs, and like in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you can show value from a POC. But does it translate to scale? And what are the challenges that you need to think of to move that hurdle? So always think about that end goal and at enterprise scale.
Well, if you know, you know, and if you don't know, sorry for you. Make sure your data has its coat on. Thank you, Laura. We will allude to what that means later, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's mine.
Right. So that rounds us off on part one. Part two is kind of the meat of the conversation here with the panel. We've identified 6 practical things that you can do with generative AI. It's not to say that other things aren't practical, or it's not to say that these will be implemented particularly well in a way that delivers value, but we know that probably 80% of the people here in the audience, as they've answered in the poll, 78% are either at the beginning or don't know enough to understand what is practical about AI. They're still figuring out their place in its universe and its place in their universe. So, use case number 1 was related to product design and development, being able to generate multiple designs, being able to prototype, being able to iterate because you're generating new things. And remember, generative AI is now getting the capability for multimodal content, generating videos, generating designs, generating images, generating text. There are lots of things around product design that it really can make a difference and speed you up. And product could mean different things. It could be design a new carburetor for a car. It could be design a new wireframe for a landing page. Second, marketing content. The ability to cycle through and create personalized email flows based on a persona, based on a user's profile, based on past behaviors, and being able to scale that up. When it works incredibly well. When it doesn't work, most of the time, it's because, fortunately, people like me have gotten really, really lazy, where we've turned ChatGPT into a very own spam cannon. Number 3, for all you techies in the audience, or dabblers, pair programming. Try GitHub Copilot, try Code Whisperer, try some of these augmentations. Okay, it may still be a little bit wonky, but look at how far it's come. The fact that it's sucking in hundreds of billions of dollars in investment, and that you've got some of the smartest minds in the world working on this. Look, 18 months ago, it couldn't tell the difference between red and blue. Now it can literally generate a movie. It can pass the bar exam. It can outperform a doctor on diagnostic reasoning, right? Code generation is getting pretty good, either code scan or code generation. You can really accelerate application development when you use the tool the right way. Number 4, employee assistance. We've often talked about, we've alluded to large language models and foundation models, but what happens when you can fine-tune that with a knowledge base, knowledge that is specific to your audience, or prompts that are locked down to your network so that you're not leaking things out into the internet, right? Employee assistance, for example, a 1,000-page technical manual that nobody's ever going to read, or curating customer support things, or knowing about policies, being able to provide context to answers in the form of a conversational interface. They're getting pretty good. Number 5, digital transcription. Now, this is perhaps something I'm a little bit more familiar with in the clinical world. Automated note-taking. We're already starting to see that one of the best uses of AI in the consultation room is now note-taking. It's all of the administrative overhead that is ripe for automation and disruption because it's starting to get good enough. Obviously, patient privacy and data security, these are really important concerns and design considerations, but think about how much time gets freed up when note-taking just becomes a part of the interface that you're using. Even Zoom has managed it quite well with their assistant. And then finally, data augmentation. There's a right way and a wrong way of doing this, but using synthetic data to train a model when, for example, the original has missing data, you need to impute values, or you need to pseudonymize. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Pseudo-anonymize.
Pseudo-anonymize data when there are privacy issues. So in summary, here's our 6 practical use cases. Panel, have you had a chance to absorb this? Cool.
It's so nice to see that there's nothing in there referring to it, to cleaning your data for you and stuff like that, because I know people will try.
So, all right. this little can of worms, I'm going to open it first, only because we have a real expert here, ladies and gentlemen. Susan, why do lazy humans try to make ChatGPT clean up dirty spreadsheets? Why?
It's a laborious, boring, cumbersome task. They don't want to do it. It takes a lot of time. And quite often, if you're not working with data on a regular basis, you're not familiar with it. So it might not be obvious sometimes if something's right or wrong. Whereas if you're working with the same data, like day in, day out, you can start to spot when things aren't quite right. So it could even be a case that they don't know what is right or wrong.
I mean, I was super impressed with the speed of how these tools can impute or fill in missing variables and help me clean my data up.
Well, enrichment is different, I would say.
Well, I wrote a couple of rules and prompts. I had missing cities, and I said, go find the missing cities, and within really 3 seconds, it had just populated
Yeah.
a list of 150 cities. My problem is that all 150 of those cities were utterly wrong.
Okay, well, I was going to say actually for things like addresses where there is public information and addresses and knowledge for GPT to pull from, you're probably likely to have a better result with something like that. But if you're asking it to clean maybe like product information or something, then it's more likely to be disastrous.
Yeah. It's also worth saying that, just literally had this conversation with a customer this morning around there's a whole raft of kind of data problems, base data. There's cleaning is one of them. There's also anomaly detection, outliers, and all that sort of stuff as well, which again is more in the AI space. The anomaly detection is a whole class in its own right. Generative transformers can be used to do that, and they're not great, but they can. But that would say is a much bigger class of AI. Where you actually start looking at, well, that number looks wrong. What's that? Let's do a historical moving average, which is a classic prescriptive metric. So there's a whole class of models, and they're not so generative AI ones, and analytics around this whole piece. So again, comes back to my, use them what they're good for, not one, a hammer. If you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Yeah, and you might need a couple of different models for the one data set to work on different parts.
Yep, exactly.
So let me take us back to the meat here. We've got 7 minutes left for this section. So these are things that are readily achievable with a minimal amount of coding effort if you've got the foundations right. These are practical use cases. We've pulled them from big banks, we've pulled them from fast growth startups, we've pulled from clinics, we've pulled from a range of different sources to research these. And these are the 6 things that you could take back to your business to justify, yes, generative AI is being used to deliver value in the real world, and the technology has reached the mainstream. So let's go 60 seconds here. Who wants to take product development as a use case? Excellent. Thanks, John.
So yeah, this is probably the more esoteric of all of them, right? So and you do see generative AI generating prototypes of user experience stuff. I know Power BI has got a whole kind of thing where you can say, ask it for, I want this type of dashboard, and it will generate basically a whole dashboard for you around this sort of piece. Again, I had an interesting conversation with a customer about this earlier around actually how to do kind of product navigation around using AI, potentially around, sort of making the user interface more intuitive by recording, navigational journeys, and then actually sort of suggesting kind of, well, actually there's some optimization around this. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting piece based on, but you do have to have the right training set for that, because obviously, if you've got a very specific kind of product design, you need a decent training set and make sure whatever foundation model has been trained on that, that type of stuff. There's also quite a bit of creativity you need to overlay on top, which is all good. And that prototyping and that kind of think of it more of an acceleration rather than completely getting rid of a design team. I think that's the important message around that. It's like, speeding up that kind of the foundation work for that would be my message.
That's so important. We've all written about this, the importance of augmented intelligence or productivity improvement rather than replacement and RPA as the approach. Susan, can I tap you up for marketing content?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, again, is based on the right information being put in so that you can pull the right information back out. I mean, I probably honestly would be better answering number 6, but I
Indeed you
haven't
would.
really done much in the marketing space with AI. But again, it's going to be down to clean data and what you get out of it and how you target or tag your audience.
Well, as the only CMO on the panel, I'm going to take this one.
Yes, thank you.
Marketing content is, and sales content in particular, creating sequences and creating outbound flows is a phenomenal capability that the teams now have. So things like being able to generate meta descriptions and meta titles and keywords from a set of content that they've already written, the ability to summarize large amounts of text and to craft a tone of voice and asking things to summarize large amounts of documents or large amounts of text in a specific way that's more accessible. Third, I've got a lot of people on various teams where English is not their native language. Help me, I know exactly what I want to say, or I know how I want to communicate it. What's the best way of saying it? Fourth, also being able to use it as a brainstorming partner, right? I'm not relying on it to be, an experienced creative director and copywriter, but it doesn't mean that I can't prompt it and it can't prompt me. So once we get into that sort of Socratic relationship, so generating content, generating images, generating videos from text, and really being able to tie that back into that personalization layer where you can pull my customer name and past purchases from Salesforce, pull their transaction ID from SAP, show me what kind of products I could recommend to them and how likely they are to respond to that. A lot of these things, this sort of retail media and hyper-personalization, that comes from getting the foundations exceptionally well. It's not just a foundation model. You've got the data provisioned really, really well. AI in marketing is going to, push a lot of bad people into the middle and push a lot of good people into the middle as well, if you make it lazy. Arjun, I want you to talk about code generation, please. How can we accelerate application development? And I'd like Aled also to talk about code generation here. Arjun, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So just like the content creation, code generation is also nothing but content creation. At the back end of it, it's all syntax-able code, like written in a certain language. So the ability to comprehend and understand any language, like be it like C or Java or Python, for any large language model, like the likes of the GPTs or the Geminis of the world, is absolutely fantastic, because it's been trained, like it has seen all that while it has gone through the training. So if the audience, if you all are aware of things like GitHub Copilot, that's a fantastic tool to get started if you're an enterprise or as an individual. Any, like I'm a big fan of Google Colab because it is free to use. You open a Google Colab, it gives you an AI assistant. And, like if you are stuck, hey, like I don't know how to define a certain function, or I don't know how the syntax to give a print statement, whatever that is, and you can ask your AI assistant and it can give you that recommendation. So I would say use that as your co-pilot in its true sense. Take the recommendation out of that. And then also, like on top of that, do your own like scrutinization, because what is happening is that it can understand, as I said, the syntax, and it can give you the syntax, absolutely right. But code is composed of two parts. One is syntax and one is logic. Now, there are 100 ways of solving the same problem. It might not be an optimal way to solve the problem, whatever your co-pilot, your coding co-pilot is recommending you. So I would say put some emphasis on that. You might want to throw your logic on top of it and see, is that the optimal way? Because you don't want to accumulate tech debt when you're like writing thousands of lines of code. But at least for the syntax part, it works absolutely well out of the box. Put some more scrutiny on the logic. So that's what I'd say.
100%. If anybody from AWS or corporate overlords are watching this on replay, I'd like to apologize. We may or may not officially endorse other vendor technologies because technically we're supposed to be independent. So Gemini, ChatGPT, it would be important to give fair mention to AWS Code Whisperer and Claude 3. There's a reason why they bought Anthropic for $4 billion. So the tools let's give a range of tools out there. Moving on, Alid. Do you reckon we could replace our head of HR with a bot?
No, it's about augmenting things and doing things that are going to be, the monotonous tasks, the sanity checking tasks as well is a good one. But absolutely, we're not going to be replacing those people. Particularly, HR is the example where it takes a bunch of stuff that's let's make sure we follow regulations, but also then let's interact with people in a nice way. If you've got good HR, and that's never going to get replaced by GenAI. But assuming that we're going on to that employee assistance, I think it's about identifying where have you got monotonous things that are being done, where have you got things that are ripe for automation. And that could augment what people are doing, or it could replace some of the menial tasks people are doing. So there's lots of things, for example, within call centers and contact centers, where a lot of those tasks are added assistance around sentiment analysis or suggested responses or whatever. It's really good return on investment, where you can see, like, if I've got 20,000 calls coming in, how much more efficient can I make those? How much more satisfied can I make the customers? How can I tell through sentiment analysis how that's doing? There's a really clear return on investment for that kind of project. Similarly, another great example I like is from Cool Planet, do analysis for sort of sustainability, environmental things to help, particularly manufacturing companies, get to net zero goals. And they historically have employed people to plow through a whole bunch of billing and invoice information for energy bills and for other information about what that manufacturer is doing. And now they're using GenAI to summarize that data and extract data. Now, I think they quoted something like 80 or 90% reliability or accuracy from doing that. So it's not entirely replacing the human, it's just massively reducing the load of what that person is doing. And I think looking for those things of where are the monotonous tasks that we can replace is where that return investment is really going to come in. Other things like adding the bot to answer people's questions, it's a nice value add. I think it's harder to calculate the return investment from it. Like, if you can stop having to have people manning your internal help desks or whatever, then great, you can really put a financial number on it. But otherwise, it's one of those ones that's quite hard to measure the efficiency gains that's coming out of it.
Thanks, Alid. It's important to mention that no heads of HR were harmed in the making of this video. We don't actually have a head of HR, so there we go. John, you and I have kind of talked about clinical use cases and separated our random forests from our GANs. Digital transcription, mate. How do you see this? This is a highly sensitive type of data, patient records. It's a very fragmented area. These are very busy, life-saving, life decision-altering kind of professionals, and yet they found a couple of use cases. How do you think digital transcription or digital assistance can help in the sort of healthcare sector?
So yeah, it's really interesting. I did a presentation for a large pharma a few months ago, and we were talking about they do a lot of clinical trials as well, right? Mm-hmm. So where they're taking notes, they're doing taking notes from patients about effects and this sort of stuff, and actually be able to actually mine that using data extract using LLMs into and along with things like classification, sentiment, and a load of other kind of classic machine learning kind of algorithms, when you actually start looking at the effectiveness of drugs in clinical trials. That's massive, and obviously the time it takes to run a trial and the whole thing and the effort required for it is the data gathering effort is huge and has a direct cost around it. So that's, if you can reduce a lot of that down and look at the signals using LLMs to actually extract out the data is super important. And obviously patient records, going to the doctors, finding out, finding an LLM that can read a doctor's handwriting is probably the first one for me. That's most doctors I've come across them a bit like myself, but how to actually mine, again, looking at large amounts of patients and the data that's actually inside the patient notes, even handwritten notes, that type of stuff, and actually makes that into some sort of structured format. Again, looking for signals, looking for patterns, looking for kind of to be able to accelerate diagnosis, to be able to accelerate, things like finding when there's a pandemic, for instance. If you saw 100 different patients having the same same symptoms in different parts of the country, and you could actually collate that together and say, actually, there's something interesting going on here, and being able to accelerate that sort of stuff is super, super important. You know, and you obviously just taking transcriptions of Zoom meetings, right? For me, I've used it 3 times a day already, you know, just from taking outside of healthcare. That is massively useful. You know, look at finding, you know, summarize this for me, find out what the you know, what the key parts for me around that. Massively useful, time saving, you know, and then being able to go further and actually turn that into kind of some structured signals around, you know, around particular use cases, again accelerating up the value chain around analytics and stuff. So I see this as being a really key use case that we're just scratching the surface of at the moment.
I just want to say it's great, but it hasn't quite mastered the Scottish accent yet. And for anyone who hasn't seen the video, if you Google Scottish lift,
oh yes, that is hilarious.
That will explain everything. You know, it's been a struggle for years.
Yeah,
and continues.
So important to say the speech to text bit is one piece of the puzzle, but actually when you're talking about written notes and kind of even typed notes and stuff, that's another piece of the puzzle. So you can, you know, you can see that. But yeah, it is unless you're talking about writing in a Scottish accent, which, you know, that would be handwriting recognition maybe. I don't know.
Well,
I think we found a very good analogy here to describe the concept behind a generative adversarial network. John, you've inadvertently stumbled upon this beautiful metaphor. It's the fact that a doctor can write a line and a squiggle and call it a prescription, but that you take that to the pharmacist and they know that that is exactly 500 milligrams of paracetamol and they will give it to you, right?
Yeah.
How do they know? How do they know?
Your own Enigma machine, right?
Exactly. So look, we've got running a little over, but this is such an important use case. Why I want to save it for last. Data augmentation and data cleaning. Susan, this one has to go to you. It's the most important out of all of these things, in my opinion. What do you have to say about augmentation and cleaning data here?
I think that there are some really great examples where GenAI can pull fact-based information through and it's very accurate. But if you're asking it to make a decision, and actually all the points here, these are all very much fact-based points. You're not asking like the employee assistant to give employee advice. You know, they're just asking for facts like, you know, what's my holiday entitlement, or, you know, what's my notice period, something like that. We had an example where we tried to normalize some suppliers in ChatGPT, and like Bob's Burger House, and they took out the word burger, which was like the most important part of the name. It was really bad. But when we used it to try and pull like financial information, like the parent company, that was pretty accurate. I mean, we still had to go through and check it, but a lot of that information, it came through way quicker than we could have Googled it. So, you know, there are benefits, but it's about knowing how to use it, when to use it, and also knowing how to be able to check the data to verify if it's right or wrong.
It's interesting. If
I could add an example, like a cool one from Amazon One, which is a palm reader, and they've actually generated a whole bunch of training data for that palm reader, because it's a hard problem when you put your hand on that palm reader. Are your fingers apart? Is your hand sweaty? Are you wearing a ring? And rather than recording a huge number of people's palms, they have actually used GenAI to generate a whole bunch of variants of those palm prints in order to train Amazon One.
Wow.
Very handy to have on a pub quiz.
One thing I can just add quickly on the data augmentation is, if you like, the outcome of any generative AI model is probabilistic in nature. And if you're going to use that as a feedback to train a model, you need to be extremely careful about what you're feeding into a model, because any machine learning model or any learning-based AI model, you know, has to be trained on ground truth. I mean, obviously there's going to be, you know, you got to check for like bias and transparency and all those things that feeds into it. So if you're going to use a synthetic generated data back into training the model, like how that augmentation is, the technology is not yet mature there. So I just want to throw that caveat out. You need to have human in the loop. There is no way around it, right? So just keep that in mind. And I've done my own experiments using ChatGPT and other open source models out there It can impute the missing values for you. Like for instance, like one of the use cases. But again, I would say take the recommendation and you as a human make the decision, because you can get top 3 answers or top 5 answers or top 5 recommendation, right? You use that to guide you. Don't use that to make the decision for you.
So, I think let's round off on part 2 here. From my side, generative AI has entered the mainstream. It's on everyone's minds and it's getting better every week. There are 6 practical use cases that we've alluded to, but how you implement them is important. Alad, 20 seconds. Summarize your top tip. How should you approach practical use cases, especially the ones that we've alluded to? Your microphone is cut out. John, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So literally did this morning with an organization. So basically, you look at, we've talked all about use cases, right? Understanding which tool's good for which part of the problem. Use cases. Let's look through your business process. You might have a specific problem you want to solve, like some efficiency problem in your operational process, or you might want a strategic problem you want to solve, which is kind of a let's do another product launch. How am I going to do that? Look at those use cases. Work out the class of problem you're trying to solve. Work out the class of model you're trying to solve. And there's some with generative AI, some will be others, some it might be a part of that. And then work out, obviously, have you got the data and all that sort of stuff? But you've got to start at that top bit, right? Fundamentally, it's you've got to work out. You can't be a solution looking for a problem.
Susan, 20 seconds, please.
But yeah, again, it's the start with the end in mind and work towards that. Figure out the steps that you're going to need to take to get there.
Thank you. Arjun?
I would say look at impact, effort, and risk. Again, from an enterprise perspective, I would tackle the ones, assuming that you have done your use case canvassing and whatnot, I would look at like low effort, high impact, low risk, right? As simple as that.
Alad, do you want to try again?
Yeah. I'll actually call out more about that best practice. We've not talked about security enough, really. And you're completely right to call out that risk. Start with internal use cases before you start thinking about making some chatbot available on your public website.
Employees are slightly more forgiving beta testers than customers. All right, let's jump into part 3. This is quite specific to AWS, but there will be versions of this that we can talk about offline. But look, when it comes to generative AI, the main services are going to be Bedrock. This is within the console. It allows you to choose a foundational model, compare foundational models, and tune it. And Amazon Q is the generative AI application, I suppose, the chat interface or the chatbot offering. Looking at language, there's transcription capabilities with Transcribe, Poly and Lex for machine learning. If you want to use AutoML to evaluate a model, or if you want to create a forecast, or if you want to create, deep machine learning models, there's SageMaker and Canvas. For computer vision, for example, one of the use cases we work on is on, cell recognition in the lab. Rekognition with a K, in case you didn't see what they did there. It's a customer experience. You've got Kendra, Translate, Personalize. For business metrics, again, I'm kind of mentioning QuickSight as their analytics offering. Fraud detection is a really important one there that we could talk about. That would probably be practical use case number 7, but it's not specific to generative AI. You've got Textract, Augmented AI, and Comprehend for doing things like sentiment analysis or augmented analysis. And then, of course, Code Whisperer, which is built into code deployment or application development pipelines along with Amazon Q. So these are, take a little screenshot, you will get the recording of this, but really the purpose of today was kind of to dig into a little bit about foundation models and chatbots, the role of foundation models, the role of knowledge bases, and the role of the interface. So how do we get started? Right, we've got 10 minutes left. We will keep this open for a Q&A. We'll stop the recording and make it a bit more of a protected session if anyone wants to continue after 4 p.m. Alad and I will be able to pick up some more technical questions, and if the panelists would like to stay, that's up to them. So let's round off on part 3, getting started with generative AI, getting started with practical use cases. Either the board of directors has lit a fire up your bum and said, go away and do this, or you're pretty geeky like us and you're experimenting and now you're looking for a home for your brilliant idea. How would we get started? Susan, you're going to say the same thing for the fourth time, I know, but it's so important to say. How do we get started?
No, I was going to say it's really about starting small. So take a small part of your data set that you know really well and test out with that, because then you can really gauge how well the model is working, the results you're getting, and then start to add in or clean your data and then add in. But yeah, don't, because if you say you've got to clean your data first, people will go, I'm just not going to do it.
Oh no, I thought you were going to say work backwards from the outcome.
Yeah, it
That's
can
your
be
go-to.
really intimidating though. So just start with what you've got, but choose an area of that data that you are comfortable and familiar with. So you know roughly what you should expect from the results and what you're going to get, and then grow or fix from there.
Fantastic, thank you. Alad, the approach to getting started, one bite at a time, eat the whole damn thing as quickly as you can, don't worry about the indigestion. What do you think?
I think it depends on who the business we're talking to, right? Like when we're talking to C-suite people, they want to know the art of the possible. Where is this going to move to? Where should I invest my budgets in different places? So at that point, it's got to be thinking big, but starting small. There's no point doing some tiny POC that's not going to give a very big return on investment if it's not going to scale up to actually making a significant difference to either the revenue or the efficiencies of that company. So it's got to be thinking about that big picture when we're talking at the business level as to what we're really going to achieve here, and focusing in on those quick win return investments to show value. If all you're doing is just talking about it and doing POCs here and there and not getting the value from it, then yeah, your fear of missing out, well, you are. And also start with the easy things, like make sure there's a policy in your business around how are marketing allowed to use Gen AI for producing press releases. What about for internal material that you don't want to risk leaking out? How are they going to use Gen AI for that? Make sure that your developers actually can use Code Whisperer or Copilot and give them guidelines about that. Make sure they're not just going to instead paste their code into ChatGPT and ask it to do things. Like, you got to make sure your code is going to stay private. So choose those quick wins first. When we're talking to some of the more sort of departmental level things where they're looking for like what can they do so that they can answer the question to the C-suite of like, what's my initiative? What am I potentially going to do with Gen AI? Then it becomes more concrete around those POCs. Like, where can we show the art of the possible, or actually show how we're going to get these efficiencies? And to that point 3 of building for scale, like, make sure it's not just going to be some dead end tiny thing. It's got to be something which is really going to shift the needle for the business.
I don't mind telling you, sir, that what you said earlier felt like a little bit of a shot across the bow. What the guidelines should be to the marketing department in writing press releases with ChatGPT. I promise you, we do not use ChatGPT for our press releases. And if you're looking for an absolute banger of a way to get started, why don't you ask ChatGPT how you can get started with generative AI? It's all getting meta. It's getting so meta.
So
No,
can I ask a quick side question? Sorry.
course.
So how, like, ethically, do you think people should disclose if they've been using ChatGPT for press releases, or?
Let's ask the audience. Got more than 100 people here in positions of thinking. Let's ask the audience. Do you think, this house believes, do you think that people should disclose the use of AI in publicly facing content like press releases or social media posts, stuff like that? Do you think that they should have an obligation to? That's a lot of yeses.
A lot of yeses.
Kind of depends if you use the AI to generate the actual salient points, or you're just using it to correct your spelling, right? It's a different scale, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's
Yeah,
going to
I was thinking like it's pretty much fully written it and you've just had to tweak a few bits of grammar. I would say
providing
that,
the insights, then yes. If it's just correcting a spelling. I use it all the time because my spelling is terrible, but I never use
Yeah.
it to generate the insight. So it's a fine distinction. But
No,
Yeah,
no,
but I
because
think there's
I pay a copywriter to help me with my blogs and all that kind of stuff because, yeah, I don't.
I need to move
Sorry,
move us on here.
I totally
No, but
took a
it's
sideways
no,
curveball there.
it's a great opportunity to pull the panel, and it's not a side point, it's on point. I think it's a good way of getting into the ethics discussion. Arjun, getting started with generative AI. Let's say that you're kind of at the middle to intermediate level, you're technically proficient, you're not in the C-suite, but you've got a bit of juice. How would you get started with generative AI use cases?
Yeah, as I say, again, from an enterprise perspective, take a bottoms-up approach with top-down buy-in. And by that, what I mean is you need executive sponsors, you need stakeholders, governance, steering committee, and all that, right? And like you need that overseeing governing body, which is comprised of not just the AI scientists, but you need to have HR, legal, marketing, everybody in that mix. But then what I mean by the bottoms-up approach is, to Susan's point earlier, take these small chunks of data that create that sandbox environment within your enterprise and be quickly able to iterate, get to that MVP. Otherwise, you won't get to that MVP, right? Like you need to be able to like quickly iterate, fail fast, learn faster, and move on. But you need that top-down buy-in. So it's kind of a mix of both, I would say. And all the salient points that we discussed, identify your business needs, focus on your ROI, prioritize your impact, all that would naturally fit in that.
Alad and John, well, John, to you first. There's a big difference between prototyping an employee chatbot that's going to have 100 users versus what Alad's point was around security, robustness, an org-wide approach. Yes, we're big advocates of get the individual to play with these tools in a personal capacity so that they've got some familiarity. It's not just going to be sprung on them. How would you approach building for scale as opposed to prototyping and learning?
So I guess it's also worth just saying, yeah, there are different modes of using of language models, or transformer models, right? There's training from scratch, there's fine tuning, and then there's RAG, which is, I would always suggest you first go to the RAG approach, where actually you're not including the actual data inside the model itself. Fundamentally, that's the quickest way. Asking questions of your data is a really easy thing to do with a large language, even with a small language model. You get that running on your laptop and that kind of stuff. So that to me is really one of the first kind of steps. If you've gone through the whole kind of the right use case, right value, and all that sort of stuff. All the excellent points. That's the point, because that's also one of the easiest things to scale. Fundamentally, that just becomes a performance issue. I want to throw some more GPU at it, right? Fundamentally, so if you can do a small use case where you're just asking questions of data, whether it's not even a full chatbot, if it's you're even a simple semantic search, that kind of stuff, or you're doing some content generation or something like that. Then you can package it up and scale it, and you can use things like Bedrock and the big providers, or you can actually use your own. You can actually use it. We run a small language model, a 7 billion language model on a Docker container, right? Fundamentally for one of our customers. So
thank you, John.
That's no worries. I expect the brown envelope later. But that to me, if you can find a use case for that, that's really the simplest way of getting going. And using RAG, and then the security becomes less, because you're not populating the model with the data. You've got much control over it. You're putting interfaces into it. Generating queries for
this
graphs,
is the point that little Bo
all that
Peep
sort of stuff.
grabs the hook and drags you off the stage and be like, no, I've got my final point to make
Exactly right,
against RAGs.
Look,
we're at 4 o'clock now. Are we? No, we're at 1400 hours. Excuse me. I would like to take 30 seconds for each of you to summarize a key point or a key takeaway. We've talked about what is generative AI and multimodal content. We've talked about the 6 practical use cases and the importance of clean data and getting the foundations right. We've talked about really going back to first principles and thinking about, what problem am I solving? Is this the right tool? Why am I doing this? Starting small with an MVP, but also being able to design for scale. We've covered a lot of things. Alad, from an engineering perspective, what's your key takeaway from this conversation for the audience?
I'm going to actually quote So Kent Beck, who's a programmer, came up with extreme programming methodology. So he said something really interesting that's sort of relevant. He said, the value of 90% of my skills is going to drop towards 0, and the leverage of the remaining 10% is going to grow towards 1,000 times. So we're not going to get rid of the humans in these loops, but we can definitely make people more efficient, and it's going to get better and better and better. So we absolutely need to be looking at what those use cases are, where we can really leverage that to get rid of the manual things, to augment what people are doing, but at the same time, really thinking seriously about security, the quality of data that's going into that, and not just trusting whatever it spits out at the end.
Thank you, Alad. Susan.
Kind of similar. So yeah, make sure your data's clean. Don't blindly trust the tool. You know, use it for the right purpose. You know, the right tool for the right purpose. And check it. Check, and check again.
Trust but verify. Arjun.
Yeah, I would say Gen AI, just like any other AI technology, the value is there, like we all are seeing and like starting to realize that. I would say act in a responsible and in an explainable manner. I'm a big proponent of responsible AI and explainable AI, and it feeds off data. So make sure your data is clean in the front end, make sure you're solving an actual business problem. And I would say focus, like take one small step at a time. Focus more on the personalization. Initially, focus on that everyday AI, focus on internally facing applications before you gain that maturity and expose it to your customers and to the outside world.
All right, thanks. John?
So understanding how they work and what they're good for and what they're not good for. I think this is it. This is, as everyone said, is use cases, but also you've got a toolkit of data science tools. Gen AI is one of them. Understand how it fits together, and start playing with small language models. That's what we do all the time. They're easy. Even if you want on AWS Kit and that spin them up on GPUs, that sort of stuff. Get playing with it. It's really simple, really easy. We built one in 2 days. So it's using Python. So start small, start with small use cases, but always make sure they're valuable and actually they generate real value to the business.
Susan, John, Alad, and Arjun, this has been the best panel that we've done.
You charmer.
Tell. Thank you, honestly, and on behalf of the audience, I think you deserve a big round of applause. So, audience, please thank our panelists for giving.
Oh no, I was going to thank the audience too, because they've
absolutely
been really engaged.
They have been. They've been a wonderful
Absolutely.
audience. So, we're going to stop the recording shortly, and we'll move into a protected Q&A. This will be recorded. We will share everything. I will leave you with this. Morgan McGuire, Chief Scientist at Roblox. The key bit of thinking here is, do you start to drive your programs with data or with code? And with that sort of shift in how we do that, the question becomes about how do you curate the data? How do you prepare the data? How do you consume the data that it's trustworthy? And I'd say if anyone's getting started with generative AI, start small, act fast, think big, but play with it. Play, learn, then do. Thank you very much. If you'd like to give some feedback, with 5 being sheer ecstasy and 1 being dog crap, tell us, how did you find this webinar? Stick it in the chat box. Chat box.
Oh,
I think Hat Team has a data classification issue. 5 is really good, 1 is terrible.
Susan, can you get on that?
I'm gonna send ChatGPT after him or her.
No, Hat Team asked for a certificate of attendance for his boss. I'm not going to give it to him now.
Yeah.
Then you could ask ChatGPT to generate one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Go generate your own. Brilliant. All right. So let's move into the Q&A portions. I'm going to stop the recording. Should I stop the recording or should I keep going? Do you think people would find the Q&A useful? Does anyone need to drop? Because we are at 5 minutes past 4. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Panelists, audience, you've been wonderful. Bisous. If anyone wants to stick around, stick around. Now, time to get into the meat.
Oh, we got 6 stars. Woo!
Who gave
Hey.
us 6 stars?
Josh.
No, Josh, you get 6 stars. Thank you. Right, does anyone have any questions? Alad is the VP of Engineering for Cloudsoft, deep AWS expert. John, formerly of Databricks, CTO at Dataception, an absolute piston head when it comes to LLMs and models. Susan, owner of the classification guru, clean data expert, and Arjun, machine learning expert, been doing machine learning since before it was cool. Those are the 4 perspectives, and little old me, a blabbermouth, for a compare. Pop your questions in the chat box, and I will pick the ones that I think are easiest to answer.
Alad's getting hot and bothered and excited already. He's just taking his jumper off, so he's ready.
Yeah.
I often tease Alad. I say that there's a decrepit old painting of him aging somewhere in an attic.
Honestly, Scottish jeans are really good. I think because we don't get much sun growing up, it steads us well in the long run.
No ultraviolet radiation up in Crete.
Except for
Alright.
those who start off peely wally and then they go on holiday
Oh.
and just come back peely.
Yeah.
All right. We've got a couple of great questions here. I'd love to hear about the best process for educating your GPT on tone of voice. It's kind of interesting. I think if you're talking about ChatGPT, there's custom instructions that you can provide, or if you Google custom GPT, you can actually start prompt training the kind of responses that you'd want, something similar for a lot of these chatbots. Anastasia, I presume that's a question around content creation. Hatim's got a great question. I'm going to pass this one to Arjun. Where do you see generative AI in 5 years for education?
Education. Wow. Okay. I do see
Absolute
that it's going to
cheaters?
have. Yeah.
100% cheating?
I do see it's going to have an integral value. At least in the US, I can see a few of the universities are already thinking about how to integrate generative AI so that their students can take advantage of that. I mean, you are going to be, a lot of the tests here and exams and whatnot are open source, like open book, right? I don't mean open source. So how can things like ChatGPT kind of augment or help that? There is a lot of ethical, there is a lot of things like, earlier we talked about citing the proper sources. So that's a lot of integrity and everything in the mix. But I feel that in education, it's going to help students learn, accelerate that knowledge-based learning process. But at the same time, one needs to be mindful of the ethics and integrity issues that this could pose.
It's funny you say that. My friend has an 11-year-old and he hates school, and he's like, why do I even need to go to school? I can just learn on YouTube. Like, he's already at that stage where he's like, I'll teach myself on YouTube. It's fine.
There's also an interesting thing around education generally around, a lot of fact-based learning. It's like, well, actually, do we need to do so much fact-based learning in the curriculum, or can we actually go further up the stack if we have a knowledge-based, instant knowledge, queryable knowledge base? The bar exam being one of those classic. So is this 5 years going to shape education? Is it actually going to move, finally get us away from this kind of very academic type of teaching? Interesting concept, which I hope it does, because not everyone learns that way. Neurodiversity and all that sort of stuff is actually really important, I think. So actually get much more into kind of, solving problems rather than understanding the facts, or finding the facts, should I say.
Can I ask, is Victoria Ruse a plant from you, Susan?
I know, I was just looking going, what? I'm in procurement space. That's my kind of question.
Absolute question for you. Victoria Ruse, what kind of use cases would you start with for procurement?
Well, interestingly, I would say no to spend classification and supplier normalization. But where you could find some amazing results is, again, with clean data, asking ChatGPT, how many suppliers do I have per category? You could get some really good dashboards from ChatGPT by asking the right questions, like, what's the average unit price per, across the board, or what's the difference in price per unit across suppliers? So you could really start to get some great kind of information that way, or like, what suppliers have we not used in the last 18 months? But be very careful with the classification piece. That is very tricky.
Yeah. Arif, that's such a specific question related to, just go and Google it. You've got five experts here. You don't need us to
Sorry,
answer
it's just
that.
worth saying for the whole contract negotiation piece, there's a massive uplift for using generative AI around that.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, like I would say any company sits on corpus of document, and procurement is no different. If you have document and if you want to tap into intelligence through that document, which is all unstructured data these days, right? PDFs and Word documents and whatnot, then I feel there is a search and retrieval process that you can create using Gen AI, right? Like instead of having a keyword-based search, you can have more like intelligent search just to like retrieve that information. So it is as simple as that. And obviously you can do, like there is this whole suite of emerging technology called like intelligent document processing, which is, like in the past it was all automation. And now it's accelerating that intelligent document processing.
You're spot on. The number of organizations within procurement who don't even have visibility on when contracts are ending or up for renewal is crazy. But with new technology, that's going to be much easier to manage.
Right.
So let me flip this around. We've still got 50 people trapped in limbo here, or our participant / victims. We want to ask you something. Who's actually who's actually struggling with an AI use case at the moment? Like, let's get past the theoretical stuff. Is anybody here on this call actually working on a generative AI or a machine learning use case right now? That they're willing to talk about publicly. All right, we'll go to the next question.
There you go. We've got one. Got one, James.
Yeah. Hello, James. Long time no see, my friend. Good to have you on there. That's an excellent question. How will regulation impact the future of generative AI? Or maybe how will generative AI affect the future of regulation? I'm going to pass that one to Arjun.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, there's an industry or a vertical focused approach, like say healthcare and BFSI, for instance, are highly regulated industries. PII and other kind of data masking is imminent, when you are ingesting data into these Gen AI models. For the non-regulated industries, maybe, it's not as strict or as stringent. But to me, I think the nations, like I know European Union is more advanced in terms of coming up with these standards. US is a little behind that, but I'm still seeing like ISO standards and NIST standards emerge. The White House is now intentionally thinking about chief AI officers and having a SWAT team to kind of be that governing body to set the standards. So I think things are kind of like starting to come in, but I'm also concerned that there is all kind of deep fakes out there. And, like we talked about AI generated content, like I was in a panel discussion recently. Do you have, for AI generated images and videos, do you need some kind of a watermarking or some kind of a tagging there saying that it is AI generated, right? So there's a lot of things up in the air. I'm not seeing answers for that very clearly coming from the governments and coming from these institutional bodies that oversee that. So that landscape is yet to be seen. I mean, like how it evolves, but at least things are heading in the right direction from what I'm seeing.
So I'm going to take 2 or 3 more questions. This one from Daniel. I'm going to pass this to John. Do you think we'll ever get a version of AI where we don't really need to question the result for accuracy, or do we still need to have some awareness that it's not 100%?
That's a great question. I think
Very philosophical.
Yes, got to remember 100%. It's like I said, the whole thing about AI is probabilistic. Well, the current state of AI in 5 years' time might not be probabilistic, right? There might be new breakthrough around that. But it's all about accuracy. And if you've got, most of the time, if you've got 90%, 95% accuracy, that's good enough. So fundamentally, you do need to understand that it's an accuracy scale. I think that's super important, you know, just in your head, because it's like it's not binary. Coming back to the sort of the fluency, our great expression of being fluent rather than being accurate. With the current state of AI, you'll need to know that it is an accuracy level, and that's what that is. So we will absolutely get to the point where that won't be a problem. Absolutely won't be a problem. But at the moment, it's definitely you need to have that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I'd add it depends on your use case, right? Like if you were happy to go to Wikipedia and read something and then trust it, then you probably get to the point where GenAI will give you the good enough answer. But if you're building some mission critical system where you wouldn't trust Wikipedia's answer, you're probably not going to trust GenAI without a whole bunch of safety checks and double checking things first. Like it's going to get better and better, but you know, never trust any one thing entirely if you're mission critical.
We have to understand that, as John has alluded to, probabilistic versus deterministic methods are statistical representations, sophisticated as they may be or convincing as they may be. But you need to go and read about objective reality, right? If I show you this piece of paper, right? According to Susan's classification guide, it's a rectangle and it's white. I think we can all agree that this is a white rectangle and it's probably a piece of paper, right? But if I showed you something a little bit more subjective, like a piece of art, how can anyone be an accurate art critic? Like, if I were to say, that's not white, that's actually magnolia, but John comes along and says, I don't know, it's more of a matte white or a brilliant white. And Susan says, actually, no, it's Persian snow for white. And it's a very specific type of white. What is accurate? What is the objective reality? I think reality has to
right?
be a construct that is agreed upon by those in the context of the decision, but that is...
Yeah, no, and that's exactly why spend classification doesn't work right now, because
Right.
it's so subjective and contextual.
Matteo has got a use case. Alad, I'm going to pass this one to you. So, an agent launched through a Docker image to help colleagues find columns inside different models within his organization. And he's really struggling right now creating the solution as a microservice. Do you want to take that one?
I'm not sure if there's enough info in that to to answer. Maybe that's one to take offline. Like,
is it the model or is it the microservice that's the problem?
A good problem, Matteo. Is it the finding of said model or the deployment of said microservice? Both.
Or is it
that's a whole other webinar?
Matteo, look, we'll Alad, John, and I will take this offline with you. It's definitely something we can give you some free advice on, or make the pain go away, doctor. Any final questions?
Oh.
I'll whip one up in Dali in a minute. Give us a second.
It's going to be the running gag. Look, I tell you what, Hatim, no, I can't be bothered to make you a certificate because I don't know you. But I'll do this for you. You can send me an email with your boss in CC, and I will confirm in writing that you were 1, in attendance, 2, that you participated, and 3, you're funny as hell. Hopefully that's good enough. Good. Thank you everyone for your time. We have
It was fun.
Gone over 20 minutes. That's okay because this is important. Massive thank you, Alad, John, Susan, Arjun. You've done an absolutely outstanding job here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for sticking around as well.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Thanks
well
all.
done, folks.
It's been fun.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.